get to it. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here, because the fact that you're here means that you're interested enough in this issue to take time out of your busy day to learn about it from us. So I really appreciate that. I want to thank Pastor Sam and his support and the church's support for putting it on, and we should all thank Charles Hong for providing the food. Okay, so let's get to it. So this is a panel about climate change, and so to start, I wanted to introduce the panelists, us. So I'm Austin. I'm a professor over at Caltech in Engineering and Applied Science Division, and I've been a member of CCH for about 5 years with my wife and 2 daughters, and Pastor Sam married us about 5 years ago over in the sanctuary, so that's when we started coming here. And I'd like these other 2 fine people to introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Chris. I used to be a student, now I graduated. I'm a postdoc at Caltech.
Hi, I'm Becky, and I'm a 3rd-year graduate student at Caltech.
Could you tell us the field that you're in? I'm sorry,
I'm in aerospace engineering, but mostly deal with bugs.
I'm in the Department of Mechanical and Civil Engineering, and my focus is earthquake engineering.
All right, great. So we're very happy that all of us could participate. So the next thing I want to talk about is why are we here? Why are we having this event? And the reason is, we are scientists in training, and we know about that we have this very serious problem of climate change, which you probably have heard a lot about. And we see that not enough progress is being made to solve it, and that could lead to very serious consequences for us and our families, and for you and your families. And so we felt compelled, as people with scientific training and background, to try to tell you guys what is going on and why it's a serious problem and what we can do to fix it. And I don't think any of us have ever done this kind of event before. I do a lot of public speaking as a professor, but I've never done an event like this before. And it just shows you how seriously we consider the situation to be. And it's such a big problem that we need everybody here, everybody in families to know about the problem and to take at least a small action to help solve it. So that's why we're here. And so the goal for today is for you to leave here convinced that you personally need to do at least a small action to help avert the worst effects of climate change. And you need to do that both for your own future and your own quality of life and that of your family. And also because part of what it means to be a Christian is to take care of this creation that we've been given, right? And the science tells us we're not doing that, and our faith tells us that we must be doing that. And so both for your own future and because of our teachings as Christians, it's very important that we start to take action. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is we have 3 panelists. We have about 30 slides. So each of us will talk for maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And then afterwards, we really want to have a discussion with you about your questions, things you may have heard on the internet. And our hope is that us being your friends and part of your community, we're a more trustworthy source of information than the internet or the news. Okay? So with that in mind, I'm going to talk for about 5 to 10 minutes on just the background of what's going on, what is climate change, and then we'll go into the effects that we're seeing today and what we need to do about it. Okay, so climate change, as you probably all know what it is, it's a change in the weather patterns over the world due to the accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And that carbon dioxide, along with other gases, is there because we burn fossil fuels for our power, to make fertilizer for growing our crops, for driving, etc. Okay, so I want to give you just a very intuitive understanding of what that actually means in terms of why is climate change happening. So to understand that, we have to think about the energy balance of our planet, of the Earth. So we know we get our energy from the sun, and I'm trying to make the laser pointer work. Okay, that's okay. So we get energy from the sun. The Earth absorbs some of that energy. And we know the temperature of the Earth is not changing very rapidly, right? So that means that the Earth has to be emitting energy away in some form so that the average energy of the Earth is not changing. So we have an energy input from the sun, we have an energy output by some mechanism, and here's how we know what that mechanism is. You may have seen for your iPhone, you can buy these infrared viewers, right, that let you see temperature. So for example, this dog here, if you look at it in visible wavelengths that we see with our eyes, you see the left picture. If you attach this thing on your iPhone and look at it through the camera, you'll see this other picture, which corresponds to the temperature. And the way that little instrument works is it detects different wavelengths of light that are being emitted by all of us. These are called infrared wavelengths of light. They're a little bit longer wavelengths than the ones that we see, and they're being emitted by you and me right now. So the wavelengths are about 10 times longer than those of visible wavelengths. And so all of us are emitting this energy. If you've ever been to a bonfire and sat close enough, you felt this wall of heat hitting you. That is infrared energy. So you might have felt that before. And that's how the energy leaves the Earth. It leaves ourselves and it leaves the Earth into space. And this is what balances that energy balance. All right, so now if you have a planet without an atmosphere like the moon, the balance is pretty simple. So the energy comes into the moon, for example, it's absorbed, and then it leaves by these infrared waves. And it's just as simple as that. When we have an atmosphere, that's when it gets a little bit more complicated, because these molecules can absorb infrared energy. So, for example, in our atmosphere we have molecules like carbon dioxide and water vapor, H2O. And when these infrared waves pass through the gas with these molecules in it, that wave can yank on the molecule in a certain orientation. And if it yanks on it at the right frequency, it can be absorbed very strongly. So think about when you're pushing your kids on the swing, if you push at the right frequency, you make them go very, very high, right? And in exactly the same way, when these waves come along with the right frequency, they pull on this molecule and they're absorbed. So molecules can absorb energy that leaves the Earth at these infrared wavelengths. Okay, so that means that the atmosphere acts as kind of a blanket for our Earth. Okay, so the energy comes into the Earth, it's absorbed, it's then re-emitted, and then some of it can be absorbed again by the atmosphere. And those molecules then can re-emit that energy in an infrared wave, and it can go up, out to space again, or it can go back down to Earth. And so what happens when you have an atmosphere is that of the original 100% that was emitted, only about 50% makes it out. Half of that, 50% of that energy stays on the Earth. So that's how the atmosphere acts like a blanket for this infrared emission of energy. There's an example in our solar system of the powerful effect of the atmosphere. Okay, so we know the two innermost planets, Mercury and Venus. Mercury is the closest to the Sun with a peak temperature of 800 Fahrenheit. Venus is the second furthest from the Sun. It receives only 25% of the sunlight as Mercury, but it's even hotter than Mercury, 864 Fahrenheit. And the reason for that is the atmosphere of Venus is almost all carbon dioxide. And it's able to trap that energy on Venus and make it even hotter than Venus, than Mercury, although it's much farther away. So there's a good example of this greenhouse effect in our solar system. Okay, so let's think about now the balances of energy in our planet. So before humans got involved, these energy balances were balanced, right? So the energy input exactly equaled the energy output, and the temperature of the Earth was basically constant. And similarly, the carbon dioxide was in balance. So every year, trees and plants and animals die, they release their carbon dioxide, and then every spring, that carbon dioxide is taken up to form new life. So there's a balance of carbon dioxide, and the concentration of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere was also a constant. Okay, so it's important to note, and this is something you probably hear in the news, climate, so long-term weather patterns, they do change due to natural reasons, right? So, for example, we have volcanoes that can emit carbon dioxide. The Earth can get slightly closer to the Sun or slightly farther away, and that can cause variations in, for example, the concentration of CO2 as well as the temperature. And you can see over these very, very long time scales, look at the units of that at the bottom. That's hundreds of thousands of years. So look at that time scale. Clearly climate does change, temperature does change, but it does it very, very, very slowly, right? Hundreds of thousands of years. When we talk about a human life on this scale, you know, it's almost just a little tiny sliver. These are very, very slow changes. Okay, so now we get to the time of the present day. You know, what did we do? And for that, I'm going to ask Chris to come down.
Hello. So like Austin said, we do see some fluctuations in that, like when we're not even there. So, but what is the role of a human, and where do we see, what are some scientific evidence that we see, is actually from here. So like it's in a similar scale in terms of time, that's the axis. But what you see on the far right, that straight line, that's not an axis, that's the impact of a human. So while we do see fluctuations, so on top, if you follow these, think of this as some sort of an envelope. So around this range, fluctuating of a carbon dioxide level within this range is a normal thing. But as we get near this industrial revolution and everything that we're doing right now, first of all, one thing to notice is the sheer amount of carbon dioxide level that has gone up. It's definitely out of this envelope that is more or less received as natural fluctuation, upper limit of that. And another thing to notice is the slope. So the word global warming, ing, kind of tells you that it's the rate that we also need to be focused on. And what we see is like, this is a straight line, which means it's like almost infinite. Like it's growing so fast that like to put it there with the other changes, it's almost like a straight line. So there are two alarming factors in this graph actually. While it's a rather boring line, this end part where it refers to our time right here, where first of all, the sheer amount of carbon dioxide level, it's off the roof. Second of all, it's growing really fast. So like Austin said, because of that carbon dioxide increase, energy that comes in from the sun now will be trapped more and more and more. So just like from Mercury and Venus comparison, we would expect, although we're further away from the sun, that we would see, compared to the old Earth, we would see slower and slower growth in the temperature. So this is a temperature now growth in Earth. While we see this is very small temperature changes, while these changes are very small, what we see is that you never see this kind of a red extreme slope again. This idea of warming, the rate at which this temperature is rising, first of all, it is slightly higher than the like some sort of a maximum temperature that we saw like many years ago. But it's also growing at an unprecedented rate. So if you compare it to any other temperature, you don't see this kind of a steep slope as compared to nowadays, which is marked by red, and it's like squeezed in there, but the red line is really alarming in two sense that it's going up first of all, but going up really fast. Another place where we can see this impact of the human is where we see this generic like ocean acidity, or what we can do is like how basically measuring how sour it is. But what we see is that these are in the rate of a million years now. I was also curious myself, so I looked up how they found it. So if you have questions, ask me later. But basically, what you see is that similar to this, because what ocean acidity is governed by is how much of that CO2 in the air it traps in. What we can see is that, like in the recent years, and a little bit of projection tells us that this is going to be really, it's growing really fast, while these oceanic pH level was rather constant, but it's dropping at a very fast rate, consistent with the rising of the CO2. So what we want to emphasize today is not just the role of human. I'm hoping that from that infinite slope peaks that we see and the rising that we see, that humans' impact is rather a natural thing, that it's rather artificially induced because of all the things that we're injecting into this world. And as a result, it's not just on the chart, and it's not just a few 0.1 centigrade temperature rise or CO2, you don't really smell any of that, but we do see some symptoms and changes in this world. So let's see what they look like. First of all, like this was a graph that was reproduced by Washington Post or USA Today, and what we see is that we do, last year was the record high temperature, 1.69 Fahrenheit higher. So this is pretty significant rise, and although the higher limit at which we'll really get into trouble, people say it's around 30 to 60 Fahrenheit, like 2 degrees Celsius. What we see is that with this small number too, that we already start seeing some of the symptoms of an effect of a global climate change. First one is Dungeness crabs. So it might seem like nothing if you don't like crabs, but I really like crabs. And when I go to boiling crab now, this market price, either they don't have it or this market price is really high. And I looked up where this crab comes from now. They don't come from California anymore. They come from Washington and Oregon. Why? Because of the warming of the ocean, the algae population rose so much, and there's an FDA regulation on how much toxicity, neurotoxin, that will mess up your brain and whatever. There's a limit to that. But Californian crabs, although they're alive, when you catch it, FDA cannot approve that because it's toxic now, because of this growing of algae. So it has a personal effect on you, and maybe same for many of you. And starting here, Becky will give you some of the symptoms of this climate change.
So climate change has also affected air travel. In mid-June, about 40 flights were canceled because the daytime temperature had increased to 120 degrees, and that made it too hot for smaller jets to generate enough lift to take off. So disruptions like these are likely to become more frequent as climate changes, making air travel more expensive and less predictable. And so climate change has also affected the ecosystems. Venomous sea snakes were spotted near Southern California beaches. And the explanation for this is tied to weather. The El Nino temperature changes, they have enticed the sea snakes to swim north to warmer waters in search of food. And we can expect changes in the precipitation patterns. For us, that means wetter winters, and that can lead to more landslides. So on May 22nd of this year, we had the Big Sur landslide, in which more than 1 million tons of rock and dirt fell onto Highway 1. And this landslide is now a $1 billion problem for California, which means it will cost that much of your tax dollars to fix and to repair the roads, bridges, and highways that got damaged from these storms. So here we will lay out the challenge, but the good news is that we can solve the problem of climate change through sensible policies and existing technology. So the problem is this. So we are adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere at the rate of 2 to 3 parts per million per year. And this graph shows us the carbon dioxide concentration since the 1960s. And we can see that the concentration is increasing nearly exponentially. And currently we are at 400 ppm, which is way beyond the safe level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So the carbon budget is the tolerable amount of greenhouse gas emissions that can be emitted to the atmosphere. And the stated goal of international climate talks is to stop the planet from warming the additional 2 degrees Celsius. And our budget is 1 trillion tons of carbon. But by year 2011, we had already used up 52% of our budget. And if we continue at the same emission rates, by the year 2045, we would exceed our budget. So what can we do? So we need a collective action on a larger scale to fix this problem of climate change. So in other words, we need a price on carbon that reflects its cost to our society. And as many of you know, 40 years ago, the air quality in Los Angeles was pretty terrible. But through the Clean Air Act, auto companies had to manage their emissions from their cars, and utilities had to clean up or manage clean their pollution as well. And thanks to the policy, now we have a better quality of life and fewer health problems. So that's similar to our problem of climate change. There is ample precedent for it, for this policy. And the specific policy in mind that we need is the carbon fee, tax, and dividend policy. It consists of 3 parts, which is we place a fee on carbon or the fossil fuels, and then we give back the fee minus the administrative costs to the household at each month. We also add a border adjustment to the carbon tax to stop any business relocation. So this policy is straightforward, simple, and effective, and which is why it has a broad bipartisan support, especially from the Republican side. So this carbon tax is actually conservative because it doesn't increase the size of the government. In fact, the revenue from the carbon tax goes directly back to the taxpayers. So fortunately, there is an organization that creates the political will for this carbon tax and dividend policy. Its sole mission is to enable millions of people like yourselves to work with the elected officials for both parties to enact this policy.
All right, thanks. So we're almost there to the end. So I just wanted to first highlight, this organization is a really good one, and they now have political power in Washington. So there's an amendment proposed by someone in Congress to prevent the Department of Defense from even planning for the effect of climate change, right? They don't want them even to think about it. And that amendment was now defeated thanks to some of the people in this Climate Solutions Caucus. Okay, so to finish up this part, I just wanted to spend some time, thinking about, why should we be taking action, right? Given the fact that we are Christians, we follow the teachings of the Bible, and the fact is, part of being a Christian is really an integral part of our belief and faith to take care of this world that is not ours. It's part of the creation, and so there are organizations that approach this problem from that mindset, and this is an example of one. But what I really want to focus on is, what does our faith tell us that we should be doing here? And so just as an example, the one verse in the Bible says the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those that live in it. This is not our world. It is our responsibility to take care of this world for ourselves and for our kids. We have kids here. Also, part of being part of the Methodist Church, we are caretakers of God's creation. Everything in here, in this world, is the Lord's. It is not ours. And it's not our duty to use it just for our own benefit, but to preserve it and care for it. So I think for this audience, it's very important to remember what are our teachings. And this is a great intersection of science and faith. Science tells us we are not taking care of this world. We are very, very far from it. And our faith says that needs to change. Okay? And it has to start with people just like you and me. All right, so that's all we have, and we didn't want to make it too long so that we can answer your questions. And so with that, I want to open it up. If you have questions about things you've seen in the news or just things that don't make sense, you've got some pretty brainy people here that can help you out. So for that, if anyone is willing to go first, you're usually the ones that speed things so I can get to the rest of the questions. Yeah.
I think you should answer those three right from the get-go because they're so popular.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Well, do you guys...
Take one each. Go for it.
Yeah. Do you have a preference for which one? First one. Okay.
So how do we know what temperature was before modern records started? So if you guys know what fossils are, that's how we know. And also, they would use chemical records as well, like found in the Arctic, so that's where it is. But yeah, so chemical records and fossils, through that we can see what temperature things like survived in, or animals survived in.
I can.
You can add to it?
Yeah. So not just any kind of fossil, but they're called proxies, and what they are is pretty much they've been, the Earth itself has been kind of its own archive, and it's been recording its own history through various locations, like Becky mentioned, like ice, meaning not just any ice, but anything that sort of sediments or has this growth of a long period of time, such as tree. Different temperature induces different growth rate. So luckily, and they keep count of their age, so you can look at their tree rate, and then you're able to tell how fast they were growing, and that growth rate is actually proportional or somewhat correlated to the temperature change. And what they do is not just take one tree and it was pretty hot back in 10,000 years. They don't do that. They take many of those evidence, the one that was most popular took 75 different kinds of proxies, I think, or different locations, I think. And they gathered those data and statistically made it so that, combined them, then averaged so that we know within what range we're confident to tell what temperature it was back in the days.
And those are exactly right, and I can give a little more detail on one particular way. People know what isotopes are. Isotopes are different molecules that are chemically the same, but they have different masses. And so water comes in two isotopes, and it weighs 18 and 19, and we won't worry about the units. But the interesting thing is the 19 one, it's a little bit heavier, right? So it takes a little bit more energy to evaporate it from the ocean. So you can tell if the Earth got a little bit hotter, you'll find a little bit more of the 19 buried in the ice. And so by comparing the ratios of 19 and 18, you can go back in temperature hundreds of thousands of years. And so like Chris was saying, you can do these measurements in completely different measurements, and they should give basically the same temperature, right? And that's in fact what you find, is you do these different ways, they give basically the same result. So that's how we have confidence in that. Okay, anyone want to tackle the second one? Okay, I'll start and you can see if you add something. So, a lot of things I read in the news, people are skeptical of what's happening because they say the Earth is so big, right? How can humans make something change that's as big as the Earth? So what I want to encourage you guys to do is just go on Google and look up some numbers. Okay, so how much carbon dioxide is there in the atmosphere? You can Google that. The answer is about 1,000 gigatons, 1 trillion tons. And the other thing you can figure out is how much CO2 are we emitting per year? And that's about 10 gigatons. So anyone know 1,000 divided by 10? That's 100 years. And that's about, that's order of magnitude of time we've been emitting carbon dioxide. So that's going to tell you, once you double the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, you can do another calculation that says that's about a 3 Celsius rise, about 6 Fahrenheit rise in the temperature of the Earth. So if you just know how much CO2 is there and how much we're emitting per year, it's pretty clear actually humans can affect something as big as the Earth with over the time scale of 100 years, which is about the length of the Industrial Revolution to date. You want to add something?
As I was studying it and discussing with Becky and Austin, what I found also alarming, for me at least, what was most alarming is we don't even have to keep adding CO2. We reach some level and Earth will start raising its own temperature. It's called positive feedback. It's like if I hit her and she hits me back a little bit harder, I'm like, why are you hitting me harder? And it gets this amplitude just keeps going up and just took that little bit of a difference in hitting power. And that was what was alarming to me. And there are so many places where at certain enough CO2 has reached that humans don't really have to burn fuels anymore for the global warming to take on its own. There are people who do say that it can go the other way, that there's a negative feedback, that, Earth will correct itself, basically. But for me, I think the main source of the feedback loop is actually the H2O. Like Austin showed that there's CO2 and H2O. They're both actually greenhouse gases. The water that you're drinking evaporates. There's trace amount in the air. Mostly it's O2 and N2, but there's trace amount in the air. But they're actually the more effective greenhouse gas. But if you can kind of do a thought experiment with me, if you raise the temperature because of a little bit of CO2, what they will do is actually evaporate a lot more water because amount of basically H2O that atmosphere can hold also scales with temperature. So if CO2 rise, temperature rise, H2O rise, temperature rise, and you can see how that can loop into producing, raising its own temperature. And for me, that was what was alarming, that the rate that we see could, at certain level of CO2, and so you cross that threshold, which scientists predict is about 2 Celsius, that we won't be able to stop this. Like once that boulder start rolling down the hill, it will be too late. So you got to keep it up there somehow. So that was what was alarming to me. So can we affect it? Yeah. It doesn't take much actually. And if you guys have comments about what we said, then
I'm a little late. Question.
Yeah.
A lot of your information for your analysis is depending on the data that's collected and measured.
Yes.
Right. So there are articles that I've read where certain well-meaning scientists question the accuracy of the data itself and the extrapolation of that data to determine that relational to climate change. And so, for purposes of us who are not really in that area of science, like data is very integrative. And so, how do you question, or what do you say where there are questions on the integrity of data? Because there have been reports where climate change scientists have somewhat tweaked the data to reach, I guess, to support the end conclusion. So they're working backwards. Right? They have a conclusion, and they're backing into the data to support the conclusion. So, how can you address those situations?
All right. I will have it. So, so there's a few points there. So first of all, where did you read it?
There was a report, I think not not too long ago.
Well, we talked before, yeah, that's a joke. So, but the point is, actually, Pastor Sam asked me a very similar question when I had lunch with him a few months ago, right? You know, you read about, you know, scientists were tweaking this data, or this data set was corrupted in some way. So, you know, the point you have to keep in mind is the people making those assertions almost always are not climate scientists. They have industry ties to fossil fuels. And in every single case that I'm aware of, there's nothing wrong with those data sets. Okay, let's say hypothetically there was. One of the central tenets of science is reproducibility. So that means I can be here, you can be there, we can do different experiments, and if we're looking for the same thing, we should get the same result. No matter if I do my experiment here and you do it in India or wherever. And so you can just throw away any data set you find objectionable for whatever reason, and there's 10 more that all show the same thing measured with different methods. So, so I think the particular thing that you said about scientists tweaking the data, this is malpractice, right? This is scientific malpractice. It doesn't happen, and when it does, it's a big deal. It would be like a doctor amputating the wrong limb, right? It's very bad. So, right, I mean, if you do this stuff, you are in big trouble. So, when you have tens of thousands of climate scientists all looking at this and trying to criticize each other, well, that's why we're here. You know us. I hope you trust us, a little bit more than you would trust the internet. We're your friends, right? We're not here to make money. We're not here. We're taking time away from our families to be here, and we don't have any motivation except to tell you what's really going on. Yes.
Well, I tend to disagree with the data practice. Tweaking data is very infrequent. Actually, my experience is actually quite frequent. Even working on the environment.
Can we give them the light?
Yeah.
I have seen that people working in environmental research field, they would tweak the data to match what the funding goal source is. I mean, I think it happened on both sides, not necessarily just funding from industry, it happened from funding from the government, so it's for people pro-environmental as well. So I don't think that's where you stated.
Well, you want to say something? So, did you hear what he said? He said, I was not right. No, he said tweaking can happen. So maybe you guys can talk about what's been your experience.
Why, first of all, what would be the motivation of tweaking, and what's the basis of
Well, usually,
what's the basis of
to get the funds.
Usually it's matching funding source, but a lot of times you're looking at what the prevailing thought process and the scientists want to join the prevailing thought. So I'm not saying they tweak the whole data, but they tweak the conclusion somewhat.
Can I add on to that? So I wouldn't consider myself a climate skeptic, but some of the people that like the label might consider me a climate skeptic because all the data you showed me, right? I'm not 100% convinced because, there's been the ice age and stuff. How come the data only shows the favorable portion? Why doesn't it go back, further in time where it shows what the, carbon dioxide levels would have been during the ice age? And where is that in reference to where we are currently? So there's different types of data manipulation where you can actually just fudge the data or only show the portions that are favorable for your argument. And that's the kind of stuff that I think he's talking about, right? Why aren't I seeing the stuff that, there are times where it gets super duper hot, right? Where is that data on here? And where's the bottom line? Where's when, the Earth is in the, ice age? Where is that line? How come I'm not seeing that in the reference points? Those are my control. I mean, I'm a scientist too, so you got to have the proper controls to make any, argumentative, statement.
I can try to answer that a little bit and maybe touch upon the bad scientist practice. I mean, it is bad scientist practice. It happens, with the fossil evidence, you can draw in the chisel in the wing and be like, oh, I found the four-winged dinosaur. And some ridiculous claims like that gets thrown out very easily. But you're also right in that, like, once there's like a popular trend that sets, people just jump in the bandwagon and say, oh, I confirm your findings, your face. There's some like atmosphere like that, and there's also a politics like within like Professor. I'm sure Austin knows that too. But I feel like despite all that, like science has progressed this society, right? More than philosophy, more than sociology, the scientists made those computers, which you're probably using. You don't doubt that, oh, I'm not so sure if this, like, it's like maybe or I don't know. Like, you don't doubt things that has been established in the past. So like, we have, I guess, records to show that despite those, like, perturbations, like, we've been, like, pretty honest with the work. And like, there was somewhat of a self-correcting discovery that writes itself. Yeah, you're right. If the people, like all the people who were messing with the data, and there might be a voice that comes out, and they'll compete scientifically. Now they are right now maybe just looking at why CO2 rise, and if there's more questions as to we don't trust it, can you show evidence, more evidence, and they'll go into like maybe measure individual factories, maybe it shouldn't become necessary. And there's somewhat of you can be more rigorous until you reach some sort of a consensus. And until that, like, I think it's a healthy criticism, and we also are trained to like to be more critical about all the data we see. So I agree. Just a second to go to Joey's comment. I also was curious, and I asked Austin myself, oh, how come it only shows like 10,000? It was actually like a scientific like leap to be able to measure them. Turns out. Before they only had like data up to 1,500. Like, you cannot do a controlled experiment in this kind of a setting, right? You have to look for proxies that actually make sense. You're more like an archaeologist now, digging up the history, and you're a historian. So like to be able to go back that far, and they keep working, funding allowed. They are keep working, but they're not trying to like cut off where it's there was actually that spike there too. We don't want to show that. I don't think it's that. I think it's just that our scientific limitation, and to be fair, I think we should definitely acknowledge that. Oh, it might have actually happened back then without human influence, maybe, but we don't have that evidence, so maybe we should study it more. And every introduction of that temperature or carbon or acid, a level of ocean, they start with that. Oh, the reason why we're digging into this history is to set that baseline. More further back we go, we see that this is a human influence. It's an evidence to us. We don't know what we'll find, but we do need that baseline, like you said, to establish that this is an artificial influence. Yeah, so that's the logic behind why they're digging, but it's I guess a work in progress.
There's somebody. Oh, you want to say?
So after questioning data, I would like to say that there's no such thing as perfect data, so we can't really wait until conclusive evidence to see the warming to do something about it, because the risk of waiting for it is greater than the effort you put in. So in science, especially when we're talking about like 10,000 years or a million years, there's no such thing as perfect data, but I do believe there's enough data to make a judgment call.
Is there a 97% consensus among scientists? Is that true? Is that a true fact?
Among scientists who know anything, it's 100%. I'm not saying it to be funny. Because the thing is, sorry, I'll get you in a second, but we can argue about the details of taking the data and how much we weight this, how much we weight that, but I think one thing that's really overlooked in people who are not in science is how good an estimate you can get with just a few equations, a few Googles. I have a slide, you can show it later. You can predict global warming in pretty good magnitude of what's actually happening in like 2 equations, right? So these back-of-the-envelope calculations allow you to quickly figure out what's probably right and what's probably wrong. And So, yeah, we can argue about the details, but the basic physics has been understood for 100 years. Yes, we have another question.
So it's been, there are a lot of experiments actually saying that carbon dioxide is not strong enough a greenhouse gas to affect the environment. Or like it does heat up a little bit, but the amount that like is currently in our atmosphere, it shouldn't affect anything. So are those experiments just like bad experiments? Or?
I don't need to take your time, but I'll just quickly answer this one. So the evidence that the amount of CO2 we have is enough is if we didn't have CO2, this world would be a frozen ball of ice, right? Because you can do the calculation and you find out the equilibrium temperature of Earth without CO2 is below freezing. So the fact that we're here at all is because of CO2. And so you can again do the calculation, you can measure for how much concentration of CO2 there is, how much energy is absorbed. And you can do that measurement and you can plug it into one equation and you can predict what's happening, what's really happening. So I think that's pretty well understood too.
Well, I think his comment was that not that there was no CO2, but the CO2 that is being added.
Yeah.
Would have that significant.
But the thing is, this amount of CO2 that was in the atmosphere before humans, that's enough to keep this planet from freezing. And we're adding extra CO2 that's comparable to that amount of CO2. So we're almost doubling the concentration. So
I'm gonna go a different tack
Yeah.
because I'm not a scientist, although I play one often. You spoke about what's the rationale. I actually don't doubt that it's not even. Not any of you are actually in the climate sciences, so you don't get any funding, I don't think, from whether you are on one side or the other, right? He studies bugs, she studies the Earth plates, and you study materials. And so I want to make that clear. But we see someone like Al Gore, who is now functionally a billionaire, and it wasn't from his ability to speak. So he actually became very enriched through his climate change endeavors. And so in this scheme that you were talking about, one of your slides was that all the money goes back to which sounds great, but this is just my experience from government. When we put in air quotes administrative fees, it's quite large, and there is an entire industry, money-making industry, because that money didn't come from thin air. Speak to that in terms of the powers that be. In terms of there are definitely fossil fuel companies that, of course, are going to fund certain research. But there is actually quite a bit of funding right now emerging, especially with the Silicon Valley and high-tech people who are very sympathetic to climate change. They're funding massive amounts of research, are they not? And then it gets to this kind of tie point of, it seems like there's so much disagreement. According to Dr. Austin Minnick, it's actually very profound that you said that 100% agreement. So therefore, if someone should rise up in the ranks of science as a scientist and begin to question that orthodoxy, will they not face quite a bit of resistance from their advisors, and their research get like the way of Galileo and the church? So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, I actually have an example of that. I think DNA actually saw a lot of resistance like that. Like I think it was like they're made out of this 4 base unit, and the mass ratio or something, or like some sort of ratio. Someone said, for example, I'm just pulling it out of thin air, so I don't remember anything detailed. But some famous scientist said 3-to-1 ratio, and everybody started quoting him. Oh, we found that too. We found that too. So it does happen when the authoritative figure. But the point is that with the advancement of the equipments, and when you're not just blindly touching the elephant's leg and trying to picture elephant, but you just see the whole picture, then it becomes quite obvious that someone was false. And when we see that kind of a contrast and contradiction, then like authoritative figure becomes authoritative figure in bad science. So like it turns the table around very quickly, and facts speak louder than the authority. I think, yeah, but it does happen, so we have to be careful for sure.
I think that's a really challenging part of this whole thing, is because in the past, you have Galileo, right? And everybody said he was wrong, but he was actually right. So could it be that all these climate scientists and even us, as just scientists, are we wrong, and maybe these few people are right? And that's why this kind of persuasion that we're trying to have with you, part of it is coming from your heart, right? Are you willing to, think of us as your community members, as your friends? We have no stake in this whatsoever. We're not in climate science. We're using our scientific training and applying it to this field that we don't know in detail, but we know the general principles. And we're telling you our conclusion is that the climate science is right, largely. There are always areas of disagreement in any field of science, but those are relatively small details compared to the general phenomena that we are changing the Earth's climate in ways that has never been happened, never been changed before. And so we can stand up here and give you all sorts of facts and figures, et cetera, but I think the more important thing is it's coming from your heart. Are you willing to think of us as your friends and community members who want you to have a good future, right? This is what it's all about. Yes.
Do we have data as far as which countries or populations omit the most? I would think, that third world countries, rural areas don't use it much, but, a very, compared to the overall percentage, and this is just me guessing that a smaller population is omitting the most amount. Is the United States one of the...
Are you talking about per capita, or are you
yeah, some of
talking
them,
about
China, the world, it's so bad that right? And so these countries omitting so much more than other places, trying to get to the root of the problem, or bigger fish, right?
I don't like that.
I'm not sure, but I would assume China, just because with pollution, I would just assume, because especially in Korean news you hear, I don't know what 미세먼지 is in English, dust. Korea had a huge problem with that, and it was because it was coming from the China side, and so I was.
But that's local pollution. That's not.
Oh, is that local?
But that's not So the law.
I would just assume.
Yeah. When I ask this question, I believe the largest, per capita pollution is like the biggest one's Australia, but I'm pretty sure the second one's the US.
Yeah. China is the largest overall emitter.
It's a big country, but it's not per capita, isn't anywhere close to it. But as one point was made about Pastor Sam bringing up Al Gore. So someone asked Al Gore, you live in a 20-room houses. And what are you doing to carbon emission? He said, I buy credit. So, but that's like paying someone to attend church, It's like, I'm going down by the river, find a homeless guy, I'll pay him $20 to attend church for me Sunday. It doesn't work that way.
I had a question on the tax aspects of the report you cited by the Baker Group, where they're trying to introduce a scheme where basically carbon becomes a commodity, where that can be traded in exchange for money. And so I guess my question relates to, because, as Professor Austin mentioned, how the science, more or less, there's some disagreement in the scientific community. I would say there's a broad consensus as to the effects of climate change. But there is a minority where they question whether the human impact is as significant as expected or as the data is explaining. But from an economic point of view, are we ready to kind of upturn the way man has kind of entered commerce or conducted commerce or our tax policies, where there's still some doubt as to whether humans as a whole can really alter climate direction. And so are we willing to upturn the way commerce is conducted or how economies operate between industrialized nations on a chance?
Actually, like, I also share some like hopelessness too when you talk about that scale. And I actually, it was part of our discussion too. He mentioned, Austin said, Paris Agreement was like the least we could have done, but you know what?
So personally, I positively, obviously from personal point of view, I think it all makes sense, but I think the part of me is from, I guess, the tax side or the economic side. My question is, we are asking countries to really upturn the way they do business, right? You know, on the hope that what we do will ultimately change the climate direction. It's aspirational, whatever. And so,
I could say something real quick. So, but one of your points was that there's some doubt. But one of the things I want to emphasize to you is there just isn't any doubt, because we have to look around at what's happening in the world. And what Chris pointed out earlier is the rapidity of the change. That's the key distinction between what's happening now, like what your question was, right? How do we know this didn't happen sometime in the past? The way that we know is just how fast, over scales of decades, that things are happening now. And in the past, the scale is thousands, tens of thousands of years. So that's how we know this is something that is unprecedented. We know it's due to humans. And there isn't any doubt as to generally things will be bad, because we can look back and see, for example, how high were the seas the last time the CO2 concentration was this high. Anyone want to guess? 30 feet higher, right? 30 feet inundate LA Basin, right? So it's a scary thing, and we have to realize that's a scary thing. And so there isn't any doubt. Now, regarding the particular policy, that was a great example of the acid rain in the 90s. President George H.W. Bush put in place a cap and trade policy, right? And that's what led to the reductions in the acid rain. So certainly there's economic impact. Certainly there is. It's going to be an impact on people. There's no way around it. But if we don't do something, there'll be an impact on billions of people. Yes?
I'm gonna also just bring into a little bit of history. Speaking about climate scientists, it was fairly well documented that in the 70s and 80s, certain scientists were at least advertising and making it known that we may be entering into our ice age, a new ice age. That was on the front cover of Newsweek, and then of course in more recent years it was global warming. But now in the literature, even global warming is not being seen as much, and this general term climate change is happening. And so I think that part of the I think skepticism that has arisen from certain circles is that well, it seems that it's kind of not like the hardcore scientists where penicillin really stops infections, and the actual goalposts keep moving. I don't know if you saw the movie Inconvenient Truth, but we're already supposed to have experienced cataclysmic events already, and so, but then now it's going to be moved up a few more years, and so I think that this is something that actually I would have loved to even buy the literature that is produced, to take a hard look at, hey, here are the things that actually we once said. It didn't seem that it worked out that way, and I think that there would be more credibility in the science if the scientists themselves would own up to various things, and so anyway, so that's one thing. If you could address the ice age that was supposed to happen, but now it's not, and then now it's not even that.
So, I somehow signed up for that class that dealt with that little bit.
Oh, good.
I don't know about I didn't know about the history. That's very interesting. But basically, the gist of what I got from that class, only thing I remember is that Earth is rather unstable. It's like I said before, it's like a boulder sitting in a hilltop. And then if you push it this way, a little too far, it will become an ice age. It's called a snow globe or a snow sphere or something. Yeah, so, and if you push it a little bit to this side, it will just burn up like Venus or something. So like, it has like a too stable point, and in the middle, it's like a little well that holds everything together. But with enough force going the wrong direction, it will tip over and then come the ice age. So, I don't think they were claiming ridiculous claims. That again was like an exercise of a few equations, which I was surprised too, although I had difficulty with it. But I think those claims, I'm also interested to see like if they ever came out and said, oh, actually we were wrong, or like, and then why the prediction was wrong, and explain to the public at least like why. What went well, you know? Oh, where does magic come from and what healed the problem, right? But yeah, I'm also actually interested in digging up information if there was anything that was remotely resembled that. That was very interesting.
So, yeah. Let me just say one quick thing is the models that are available now, they predict what has happened. You know, if you start at a certain time and you predict what the temperature should be and what it is, they work. So
are they operating off of a different model now than in the 70s and 80s?
Well, you know, that's from 50, 40 years ago, right? So yeah, certainly, every field learns. Yeah. So why don't we make this the last question because we're running out of time.
Thank you guys. I guess regardless of the data, carbon dioxide, I think just like all the trash that we could recycle, like just the earth, like caring for earth, that should like still convict us to recycle more and stuff. So, having said that, I'm not sure what the effect is for Trump not agreeing to the
Paris Accord.
Yeah. Can you explain that a little bit, how that will affect us? And why was
That's actually a great way to end on this point. So, you know, why are we here, right? If that hadn't happened, you know, we wouldn't be here because we are very alarmed, right? As scientists, we are very alarmed. So the Paris Agreement is really the best hope we have to making the reduction of emissions necessary. You know, we have this carbon budget, right? The longer it takes to start reducing, the harder and harder it gets to meet that goal. And so it's essential that we start essentially now. And you know, we aren't really doing that. And so that's why we, you know, together, for what it's worth, we are unanimously saying that this is a big problem. And you know, you guys have a lot of great questions, and I think this is a good example of something where just facts and figures are not going to do it. Because all of you have your own expertise in your own fields. You don't have time to dig through all the literature of climate science. And so it depends a little bit on faith, right? There's faith involved in this, in the sense that you are putting your faith in other people that we are not making this up and that we really have a big problem. Now, in other fields like medicine, you know, we have less of a problem with faith. You know, if the doctor tells us he has to chop off our foot, okay, if that's what you say, you go ahead and do it, right? Right? You might get a second opinion, but we trust doctors, right? Even though there are people like Dr. Oz that sell us weight loss advice, right? Okay? So in any field, there are people that are not giving us the best advice. And science, unfortunately, is no different than any of these other fields. There are people that get paid by the fossil fuel industry to tell you things that are not true. And that's the hard part about this. And so the reason that we wanted to do this is so that you can hear from people that you know and hopefully will trust more than other people, and people who have spent time to look through the literature and the data and have looked at it with a completely independent perspective and say, we need your help to solve this problem. It will involve economic impact, absolutely, but we can do it in a way that minimizes that to many people. So with that, I really want to thank you for being here. You have a question?
Can you just quickly address practical things we can do as individual citizens and humans on Earth?
Thank you. You are so fantastic.
Yeah.
How much did you pay her for that?
He's a shield. He's a shield.
I am an upstanding scientist. I don't think. So if you don't mind, pass these around. This is the most effective thing you can do to help solve this problem. It's a group called Citizens Climate Lobby. You see they have political power in Washington. They're able to defeat these amendments that are trying to stop sensible things like planning for the effects of climate change. And there's a fascinating chapter that I'm part of. I don't know if you guys, maybe you can join, you're already gone. But this is the most effective way. We need a national policy. And everything else you do is essentially, won't be as effective as doing this.
But that's actually what other people do. What we can do ourselves, some small things we do ourselves.
Well, you certainly can do things like buying LED light bulbs and stuff like that, but I think the fact is this requires a change by billions of people. So you need a market incentive to make that change happen. And so the things you can do are as simple as calling your legislators, you're calling your state senators or US senators and representatives when it's time to provide political support for these policies. And if you join the mailing list of this organization, you'll get notifications as to when those times happen. So all you do, pick up the phone, call someone, 2 minutes, you're done. And that's really what it takes.
So I want to thank them. Chris is coming back. He's coming back from his honeymoon to just do this. It's unbelievable. He loves his wife, but he apparently loves us more. And so that's wonderful. Actually, he's just in town. Anyway, but I really just want to honor this time. I just love the fact that we are able to sensibly talk about some very sensitive issues, and there's passion all around, but no fists are flying and no accusations are flying, and so in some ways we're modeling, are we not, for the world, how to actually have conversations. And here's the big thing, and this is the thing about us being a community. All three of these individuals are friends, and they are available. As Austin has mentioned, we've actually met twice on this subject alone, and we're constantly open to dialogue. And even right after this, I'm going to actually whisper something in his ear that he needs to consider and talk about this bill. So I think that we're just so blessed. We have a tremendous wealth of experience, and for us to take part, and look at the good researcher. He even did the Book of Discipline from the UN. As soon as he pulled that up, I go, oh my God, straight A student, I can't stand it. This guy went into citing literature that I didn't even know. Let's go into prayer and just appreciate what we all have as community. Lord God, we thank you so much for calling us to be your stewards of the earth. And Father, each day we see that the beauty, but also the fragility of life, beauty. Lord, we know that it just takes a little to destroy purity. And so, Father, we ask for open hearts and open minds and open lines of communication. Lord, we thank you so much for the passion and the insight that was shared this afternoon. And Father, we pray that it would just be the beginning of longer conversations, more intimate conversations, relationships. Because Lord, we know that ultimately we will be held accountable to our lives fully in what we do and what we did not do. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
All right. Thank you. By the way, if there is interest in this, greater interest, we'll just have to gauge from this. But we could impanel some other speakers. I don't know if you know, but Pasadena, certainly South Pasadena, is actually one of the more progressive cities when it concerns environmental science. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes, very much so. And so we have local experts and or policymakers that have actually been working on this for many years. And so again, I know that they're all very open. If this interests our church members, we certainly can make that available to you. Okay, thank you.